Just a quick intro from me. We keep being told that we shouldn't be afraid to make jokes about Muslims or Islam in the same way we make jokes about any religion. Recently, British comedian Ben Elton found himself so stifled by political correctness that he felt the need to speak out. Now, this was followed a day later by a nod of agreement in the form of Thought for the Day on the BBC from Monica Siddiqui, herself a Muslim and director of the Centre for the Study of Islam. So, I'm going to take a back seat here. This isn't the most exciting video on YouTube probably, but stick with it and have a listen and you'll see their points. So let's start though with a few seconds from a Simpsons episode from 1999 titled Grift of the Maggie. Notice anything here? Anyway, enjoy that, and yes, I can include this clip under the fair use for example, so calm down, and then we'll go straight to the other two clips. Krusty.
So have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwasi Kwanzaa, a tip-top tet, and a solemn, dignified Ramadan.
Is the BBC scared of doing jokes about Islam? Yes, says the comedy writer Ben Elton. In an interview with a Christian magazine called Third Way, he's asked about the law on religious hatred and whether religious people have too much deference shown towards them. He's quoted as saying,
I think it all starts with people nodding whenever anyone says, as a person of faith. And I believe that part of it is due to the genuine fear that the authorities and the community have about provoking the radical elements of Islam. There's no doubt about it. The BBC will let vicar gags pass, but they would not let imam gags pass.
He goes on to say it's got nothing to do with moral sensibilities, it's because they're scared. He gave an example.
I wanted to use the phrase, Muhammad, come to the mountain, and everybody said, oh, just don't go there. It was nothing to do with Islam. I was merely referring to the old proverb, if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad must go to the mountain. And people said, let's just not. It's incredible.
And he added this about Muslims.
I'm quite certain that the average Muslim does not want everybody going around thinking, we can't mention you. We've just got to pretend you don't exist, because we're scared that somebody who claims to represent you will threaten to kill us.
Well, the BBC declined to be interviewed, but said in a statement that no subject is off limits for BBC comedy. We're always mindful when dealing with sensitive subjects and follow strict editorial guidelines, whilst ensuring originality and adventure in all our comedies. I'm joined on the phone by Jeff Mercer, who's Muslim and a comedian. Does Ben Elton have a point?
Well, I think what he's doing is he's come across something that, you know, lots of comedians like myself have come across. This kind of situation where everybody becomes so sensitized, or, you know, you use that phrase, sensitive subjects. Well, what is a sensitive subject? I mean, I've found that the community in the last sort of 10 years when I've been doing stand-up has really changed. You know, originally they were a bit like that. They were a bit sort of don't talk about certain subjects. You know, if you'd go in and if you'd be doing stand-up and you'd be in front of a Muslim crowd, you know, you'd have to be very careful. But now I'm getting booked by the same people who maybe 5 or 10 years ago were saying don't talk about these subjects. So he's got a point, but I think he's come across something which we do see a little bit at the BBC sometimes, is that people are worried about, you know, like if I do something on BBC World, for example, they'd be like, oh, please tone it down a bit because we've got listeners in Pakistan or in Somalia or in different countries, you know.
And do you think that implies that some people at the BBC think Muslims don't have a sense of humour, or is there a more serious basis? For instance, I mean, the Danish cartoon protests spring to mind, don't they?
Yeah, I suppose so, but the Danish cartoons is a bit too blunt and a bit too primitive to use that as a kind of an art form, really, from my mind. But for example, you know, what you said about the people think, you know, worried, think that Muslims don't have a sense of humour. I think that we've gone past that one now. I think they do realise that we've got a sense of humour. But I think there is a kind of, you know, we mustn't upset them because they don't, you know, people don't want to be seen as being sort of beating up on a community that may be, you know, not doing so well. So there may be a little bit of that, you know, patronising, I think, may be a word. But I think they've got to realise that the community is more robust than they think it is, and like all jokes, if you do something about the Jewish community or the Irish community, you know, it's always best coming from the same community. Like a Muslim person doing gags about Muslims is better, I think. But I think there's nothing wrong with Ben Elton doing gags about Muslims. I think it's a good idea. I'm sure he would do a good job. But you know, they shouldn't be, the people at the BBC shouldn't be so sensitive, because, you know, in other subjects, if you look at some of the TV programs on BBC Three, which I think are excellent, they have tackled sort of tricky subjects that people could be offended by, and they've tackled them really well.
When there are jokes about Muslims in the British media, let's expand it beyond the BBC, I suppose. What sort of jokes are told? How sophisticated are they?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of sort of live work, you know, I do a lot of live stand-up, and last week I was performing in Glasgow, and there was, you know, a couple of mullahs, basically, in the audience, you know, and, you know, I said to them, you know, I asked them a question, do you cook? And they said, yes. I said, do you cook for your wife? I said, yes. I said, oh, look at this, modern mullahs, I love them. And, you know, people, and they were laughing, and everyone was laughing.
But is that easier for you because you're Muslim, if you were
yeah, I mean, it is
of any
easy,
other
but
faith?
Well, I kind of know the culture and know which way they're, you know, what will make them laugh. But what I like to do is I like to always push it a little bit, because it's important that, you know, we talk about some issues and talk about subjects. And, you know, like, for example, I say that, you know, there is a news program, you know, out there. That's the only chance that Muslims get to be on TV. You know, it's on the news. I think some of these people just want to be on TV. Some of these people protesting all the time. So if you talk about subjects like that, they do. Well, I talk about effigy burning, for example. You know.
Look, thanks for doing that for us, Jeff Mirza, Muslim and comedian. We appreciate your time.
BBC. To find out more, visit bbc.co.uk/Radio4.
Good morning. There is no doubt about it. The BBC will let vicar gags pass, but they won't let imam gags pass. These are comments made by Ben Elton in a recent interview, in which he makes a general point that political correctness has made authorities and communities scared to make jokes about Islam or Muslims for fear of upsetting radical elements. Whether this is true or not, as a Muslim myself, I can understand what is being implied here. The question of Islam and humour is not one of does Islam have a sense of humour, but is essentially one of why can't Muslims take a joke? Why do they have to react violently whenever their faith or culture is critiqued in any way? The usual response to such questions from clerics and religious mouthpieces hardly satisfies anyone. Of course Islam has a sense of humour. The Prophet would often do or say such and such a thing. This is hardly the stuff of side-splitting laughter. In a world where everything is up for critique, where nothing remains sacred anymore, why should faith, and for that matter, one faith, be exempt from global commentary? In a world where freedom of expression is paraded as the ultimate triumph of robust democracies, faith is only one aspect of society with all its weaknesses and strengths. It must remain open to both protection and objection. Noam Chomsky said that if you believe in freedom of speech, you believe in freedom of speech for views you don't like. But many of faith often complain that freedom of speech and expression should not mean freedom to deliberately offend. But how does one avoid the possibility of offending when the freedom to exchange ideas is seen as a very pillar of a tolerant society? In our current climate, debates on faith and society have become so polarized that one can almost imagine the two armies of secularism and religion engaged in a bloody ideological war. Yet I expect most of us with faith don't recognize ourselves in such battles. For me, religion is not weakened but strengthened by humour, the ability to see the bad with the good. The problems as well as the gifts of faith demand that we be honest and reflective, able to engage with a wide array of cultural and social perspectives. The ability to see ourselves as others might see us is a sign of humility. The ability to laugh at ourselves is a sign of confidence and maturity, that we take neither ourselves nor what we believe to be the only moral arbiters of society. Laughter not only connects us to each other, but lifts the soul, and as E. Cummings said, the most wasted